Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded marketplace in Old England. The smell of bread, the shouts of traders, the restless animals moving through the mud. It all feels like the ordinary rhythm of life. But then, the noise fades. All eyes turn to a single scene. A woman stands still, a ribbon tied around her neck. She isn't holding a basket of goods. She isn't here to buy or sell food. She is the one being sold. By her own husband, in front of strangers. It sounds unthinkable, like a twisted story or a cruel rumor, but it was real. From the late 1600s to the early 1900s, wife selling was a shocking, though unofficial way for ordinary couples in Britain to end their marriages. Why would men sell their wives? And why did entire communities watch, accept, and sometimes even cheer? The answers reveal a truth darker and stranger than fiction. To understand why this bizarre custom existed, we need to step into the reality of marriage in the 18th and 19th centuries. Back then, marriage was not just about love. It was a binding legal contract. And once a woman married, almost all her rights were handed over to her husband. She could not own property, sign contracts, or even control her own earnings. Now imagine wanting to escape such a marriage. For the wealthy, there was a solution: divorce. But for ordinary working people, divorce was nearly impossible. It required a long and expensive legal process, sometimes even a private act of parliament. Few could ever dream of affording it. So what did couples do when love was gone, when living together became unbearable? They turned to the only option they felt they had: the public ritual of wife selling. Strange as it seems today, it was often seen not as cruelty, but as a practical escape, a way to move on when the law refused to help. Wife selling was not a random act. It often followed a set pattern, almost like a strange ritual. Sometimes notices were posted in advance, announcing the time and place, as if it were an upcoming auction. On the chosen day, the woman would be led through town, often wearing a ribbon or halter around her neck or waist. This wasn't meant to restrain her, but to symbolize that she was being offered. The sale usually took place in public spaces, a busy market square, a tavern yard, or even on the steps of a courthouse. Crowds gathered, curious to watch. The woman was sometimes tied to a post, while her husband called for bids. But here's the surprising part: the buyer was often not a stranger. In many cases, it was the woman's lover, or a man she had already chosen. The sale was less about money and more about making the separation official in the eyes of the community. To bystanders, this public act meant one thing: the marriage was over. At first glance, wife selling looks like pure humiliation, but the truth is more complicated. In many cases, women were not helpless victims. Some were willing participants, eager to escape unhappy marriages. A few even insisted on choosing the man who would buy them. One striking example comes from 1824. A woman was auctioned in a market, but when she saw who had placed the winning bid, she refused him. She demanded the sale be repeated. The crowd agreed, and she was finally sold to a man she actually wanted, for a lower price and a quart of ale. Strange as it sounds, these sales could give women a rare voice in a society that usually silenced them. Some were already living with their new partners before the sale even took place. In these cases, the market wasn't just theatre. It was a path to freedom, however unusual it may seem today. For the crowds, wife selling was more than a transaction. It was entertainment. People gathered in markets or taverns, not just to witness the sale, but to enjoy the spectacle. Some events were so popular that they disrupted business. In one case, a sale had to be postponed because the crowd was too large for the marketplace to function. Laughter, drinking, and shouting often filled the scene. The sales themselves could look almost theatrical. In 1815, John Osborne sold his wife and child for £1 inside a tavern, simply because the market was closed that day. In another case, a woman was sold for 50 guineas and a horse, leaving the square in a carriage beside her new partner. No shame, no hesitation. The payments were often symbolic: coins, animals, or even beer. In one Brighton case, the price was 8 pots of ale. For the community, the message was clear: this marriage had ended. Of course, not every story was light or cooperative. Behind the noise and spectacle, some wife sales ended in pain, regret, or tragedy. In 1766, a carpenter in Swook sold his wife during a drunken fit at an alehouse. There is no sign she agreed. The next day, sober and ashamed, he begged her to return. She refused. Crushed by guilt and humiliation, he later took his own life. Other cases were marked by anger and betrayal. In 1804, a London shopkeeper caught his wife with another man. Instead of a violent fight, the lover offered to buy her on the spot, and the husband agreed. The sale ended their marriage instantly, but the humiliation lingered. These darker stories remind us that wife-selling was never just a strange ritual. Real lives were being torn apart. The stage may have seemed theatrical, but the emotions were painfully real. Not everyone saw wife-selling as harmless or practical. Even in its own time, many people were shocked by the practice. In 1797, a journalist for the Times described a wife sale as a disgraceful spectacle of the lower classes. Judges, priests, and politicians also began speaking out. In one 1806 case, police were forced to protect a man trying to sell his wife from an angry crowd that found the act intolerable. Public opinion was slowly shifting. What once looked like a symbolic solution now seemed cruel and degrading. As ideas about women's rights and dignity spread, the ritual came under increasing criticism. By the early 19th century, wife-selling was no longer viewed as just a local custom. It was becoming a stain on Britain's reputation and a tradition that could not survive for much longer. By the 1830s, wife-selling was already fading. Social reform, growing awareness of women's rights, and the rise of newspapers made the practice harder to ignore or excuse. The turning point came in 1857 with the Matrimonial Causes Act. For the first time, divorce became more accessible to ordinary people, giving couples a legal path to separation. With this change, the need for public sales nearly disappeared. Still, the custom lingered in some rural areas. The final recorded case came in 1913, when a man quietly sold his wife to a co-worker for £1. No marketplace, no ribbon, just a whispered deal. A shadow of a vanishing tradition. Today, the idea of wife-selling sounds shocking, even absurd. But within this strange tradition lies a deeper truth about history. For poor families trapped in unhappy marriages, with no legal escape and few choices, the ritual became a desperate form of freedom. It was never truly about money. It was about making separation public, about ending ties in a society where women had little voice and divorce was out of reach. Wife-selling reminds us how far we have come, and how for centuries, ordinary people invented their own ways to survive within an unforgiving system.